It was a bright, sunny afternoon in Pinewood Hills. This was a small, quiet neighborhood where houses sat close together and kids rode bikes down the street. Everyone knew everyone, or at least that's what they thought. The trees were green, the grass was neat, and the air smelled like flowers. It was the kind of place where nothing big ever happened, or so it seemed. In one little house with a white fence lived Jake Miller. Jake was a friendly guy with messy brown hair and a big smile. He liked simple things like fixing stuff, drinking lemonade, and sitting outside. A few days ago, he decided to make something special. He grabbed some wood, a hammer, and nails from his garage. He worked hard all day, banging and sawing until he had a bench. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. He sanded it smooth so it wouldn't give splinters. Then he painted it bright red because red was his favorite color. When it was done, he carried it to his front porch and set it down right by the door. Perfect. Now he had a spot to sit and watch the world go by. Now Jake loved his new bench. Every evening he'd grab a glass of cold lemonade, plop down and relax. He'd wave at neighbors walking their dogs or kids zooming by on scooters. The bench made him happy. It was sturdy, it was bright, and it was his own little piece of the porch. To Jake, it was just a bench. Simple, right? But not everyone agreed. Across the street lived Karen Baxter. Karen wasn't like Jake. She didn't smile much and she didn't wave at people. She was the boss of the HOA, that's the group that makes rules for the neighborhood. Karen loved rules. She loved them so much she carried a clipboard everywhere, writing down anything she didn't like. If your grass was too long, she'd write it down. If your mailbox was crooked, she'd write it down. And if she didn't like you, well, she'd find a rule to make your life hard. To Karen, the neighborhood was her kingdom, and she was the queen. Karen had short blonde hair and wore flip-flops that slapped the ground when she walked. She'd march up and down the street, her eyes sharp like a hawk, looking for trouble. And when she saw Jake's red bench, oh boy, did she find it. To her, that bench wasn't just a place to sit, it was a problem, a big, red, ugly problem. Too bright, she'd mumble to herself, squinting at it from her window. Too close to the walkway, she'd say, shaking her head. She didn't think it belonged there. And she thought it broke the rules, her rules. Every time Karen looked out her window, that bench stared back at her. It was like it was laughing at her, saying, "I'm here and I'm not moving." She'd frown and tap her pen on her clipboard. She'd mutter things under her breath, things like, "That's not allowed," or "He can't do that." To Karen, Jake's bench was more than wood and paint. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. She couldn't stand it. It made her mad, really mad. Jake didn't know how much Karen hated his bench. He didn't think about it at all. To him, she was just the grumpy lady across the street. Every evening, he'd sit on his bench, sipping his lemonade and watch the sunset. Sometimes Karen would peek out from behind her curtains, glaring at him. Jake would see her and wave. "Hey, Karen," he'd call out with a big grin. She'd huff and pull the curtains shut. Jake thought it was funny. He didn't care what she thought. It was his porch, his bench, his house. What was the big deal? But Karen wasn't the kind of person who let things go. Oh no, she wasn't the type to shrug and say, "Oh well." When something bugged her, she had to fix it. And Jake's bench, it bugged her a lot. She'd stand on her lawn, staring at it, her arms crossed tight. She'd pace back and forth, her flip-flops smacking the grass. She'd talk to herself, making plans. "He thinks he can just put that there," she'd say. "Not in my neighborhood." Jake had no clue what was brewing across the street. He didn't know Karen was watching him like a detective in a movie. He didn't know she was writing notes about his bench on her clipboard. He didn't know she was getting madder every day. To him, life was good. The sun was warm, the lemonade was cold, and the bench was comfy. What could go wrong? The truth was, Jake didn't see Karen the way she saw herself. He didn't know she thought she owned the whole street. He didn't know she spent her days dreaming up ways to control everything. To Jake, she was just a neighbor, a loud, fussy one, sure, but still just a neighbor. He didn't think she'd do anything crazy. He figured she'd grumble and glare and that'd be it. But Karen had other ideas, big ideas, sneaky ideas. It started small. One morning, Jake found a note taped to his bench. It was written in big, angry letters. "Move this now, no name, no please," just those 3 words. Jake laughed and tossed it in the trash. Probably Karen, he said to himself, shaking his head. He didn't think much of it. People get mad sometimes, right? No big deal. He went back to his day, hammering some boards in his garage, not worrying about a thing. But Karen wasn't done. That note was just the beginning. She started watching Jake even more. She'd stand by her mailbox, pretending to check her letters, but really she was staring at that bench. She'd walk by his house super slow, her eyes locked on it. She'd even take pictures with her phone, zooming in like she was collecting proof. Proof of what? Jake didn't know. He'd see her out there and wave again. "Nice day, huh?" he'd yell. She'd turn red and stomp away. The neighborhood started to notice. Old Mr. Thompson, who lived next door to Jake, saw Karen snapping those pictures. "What's she up to now?" he asked Jake one day, leaning on his cane. Jake shrugged. "Beats me. She doesn't like my bench, I guess." Mr. Thompson chuckled. "That woman's got too much time on her hands." They both laughed, and Jake went back to sipping his lemonade. He wasn't worried, not yet. But Karen's glares weren't just glares anymore. They were warnings. She wasn't just annoyed, she was planning. Every time she saw Jake on that bench, her frown got deeper. Every time he waved, her hands clenched tighter. She didn't like being ignored. She didn't like that Jake didn't care about her rules. To her, this wasn't just about a bench. It was about power, and she wasn't going to lose. Jake kept living his life, happy as could be. He'd sit on his bench every night, watching the stars pop out one by one. He'd listen to crickets chirping and dogs barking in the distance. He'd think about how nice it was to have a spot to rest. He didn't know Karen was across the street, plotting. He didn't know she was about to make a move, a big one. He didn't know that his quiet little world was about to get a whole lot louder. The sun kept shining in Pinewood Hills. The kids kept riding their bikes. The dogs kept barking, and Jake kept sitting on his bench. But Karen, she was ready to strike. She had a phone in one hand and her clipboard in the other. She had a plan in her head and a fire in her eyes. Jake had no idea what was coming, not a clue, but it was coming fast. So there they were, Jake, the guy who just wanted to sit, and Karen, the lady who wanted to rule. 2 neighbors, 1 street, 1 red bench. It sounded so simple. But simple things can turn big, really big, when someone like Karen gets involved. What would she do next? How far would she go? Jake didn't know. The neighborhood didn't know, but they were all about to find out. One sunny day, things got loud in Pinewood Hills. Karen Baxter, the HOA queen, decided she'd had enough of Jake Miller's red bench. She put on her flip-flops, grabbed her clipboard, and marched across the street. Her shoes smacked the pavement hard, like little thunderclaps booming with every step. She stopped right in front of Jake's porch, her eyes narrow and her lips tight. Jake was sitting on his bench sipping lemonade when she pointed a finger at him. Her nail was painted bright pink, and it shook a little because she was so mad. "That bench is against the rules," she barked, her voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. "It's an eyesore and I'm reporting you." An eyesore means something ugly, and to Karen, that red bench was the ugliest thing she'd ever seen. She stood there, hands on her hips, waiting for Jake to jump up and say sorry. But Jake didn't jump, he didn't even frown, he just shrugged his shoulders like it was no big deal. "It's my porch, Karen," he said, calm as could be. "Relax." Relax, that word hit Karen like a lightning bolt. Her face turned red and her eyes got big. Relax, how could she relax when that bench was sitting there breaking her rules? To her, Jake wasn't just a guy with a bench. He was a rebel, a troublemaker, someone who didn't listen to her. She didn't say another word. She spun around so fast her flip-flops almost flew off, and she stormed back to her house. Her arms swung like she was ready to fight someone. Now Jake watched her go, a little smile on his face. He took another sip of lemonade and shook his head. "She's funny," he thought. But Karen wasn't laughing. Oh no, that word, relax, lit a fire inside her. She didn't go inside to cool off or forget about it. Nope, she grabbed her phone right away, her fingers moving fast as she dialed the HOA hotline. It wasn't 911, but to Karen it might as well have been. "Hello," she said when someone answered. "This is Karen Baxter from Pinewood Hills. I've got a problem. There's an illegal bench across the street. It's red and ugly and it's breaking every rule we have." She talked fast, her voice getting louder with every word. Jake couldn't hear her, but he saw her through his window, packing on her lawn, waving her arms like she was calling for help. Jake chuckled to himself. "She's all talk," he said out loud, even though no one was there to hear him. He figured she'd yell and complain, but nothing would happen. People get mad sometimes, right? He leaned back on his bench, the wood creaking a little under him, and watched a bird hop across his yard. To him, it was just another day, but Karen wasn't playing. She wasn't all talk, she meant business. The next morning, Jake woke up to a surprise. He shuffled outside in his slippers to get the mail, and there it was, a letter. It wasn't a friendly note or a birthday card. It was on fancy paper with a big HOA stamp at the top. He ripped it open and read it. The words were short and mean. "Remove the bench or pay $200. $200 for a bench." Jake's eyes got wide for a second, but then he laughed. "This is crazy," he said. He crumpled the letter into a ball and tossed it in the trash can by his porch. "She's nuts," he muttered, shaking his head again. He wasn't going to pay money for his own bench. No way. Karen watched from her window, peeking through the blinds. She saw Jake throw the letter away, and it made her madder than ever. "He thinks he can ignore me," she whispered to herself. Her clipboard was on the table, full of notes about Jake and his bench. She picked up her pen and wrote more, refused to follow orders, threw away notice. She underlined it twice, her pen digging into the paper. To her, this wasn't just about a bench anymore. It was a war she was going to win. From that day on, Karen turned into a spy. She didn't just glare at Jake anymore, she watched him like a hawk. Every time he stepped outside, she was there, peeking through her blinds. She'd pull them apart just enough to see her eyes following him. If he sat on the bench, she'd grab her clipboard and scribble something down. Sitting again, she'd write. 4:32 p.m. She'd even count how many minutes he stayed there like it was a crime. Jake didn't know she was keeping track. He didn't see her little notebook filling up with notes about him. The neighbors started talking. Mrs. Lopez, who lived 2 houses down, saw Karen sneaking around one day. "She's losing it," Mrs. Lopez said to her husband, watching Karen take a picture of Jake's bench with her phone. "What's wrong with that lady?" Mr. Thompson, the old guy next door to Jake, heard a rumor too. He told Jake one afternoon, "I heard she called the cops on you." Jake blinked. "The cops? For what?" Mr. Thompson shrugged. "She said your bench was suspicious. Can you believe that?" Now Jake laughed so hard he almost spilled his lemonade. "Suspicious? It's a bench. What's it gonna do? Run away?" "Suspicious, that's the word Karen used. She called the police one quiet evening, her voice shaky like she was scared. 'Officer,' she'd said, 'there's something weird going on across the street. My neighbor's got this bench and it's suspicious. I don't know what he's up to, but it's not right.' The person on the phone didn't sound impressed, but they said they'd look into it." Karen hung up, smiling like she'd just solved a big mystery. She thought the cops would come racing in, lights flashing, to take that bench away. She thought Jake would finally learn his lesson. But nothing happened. No police showed up. Jake kept sitting on his bench, waving at people, drinking his lemonade. Karen didn't understand. Why wasn't anyone listening to her? Why wasn't Jake scared? She started walking by his house more often, her flip-flops smacking louder each time. She'd stop and stare at the bench, her arms crossed, her face all scrunched up. Sometimes Jake would wave at her. "Hey Karen, want some lemonade?" he'd yell, holding up his glass. She'd huff and march away, her cheeks turning pink. Deep down, Jake was starting to wonder. He didn't show it, he still smiled and acted like everything was fine, but a little question popped into his head. How far would this lady go? She'd already sent a letter, she'd called the HOA, she'd even called the cops. What was next? He didn't say it out loud, but he kept his eyes open. Every time he saw Karen watching him, that question got a little bigger. He wasn't scared, not yet, but he wasn't as relaxed as he used to be. Karen wasn't slowing down. She started knocking on doors, talking to neighbors. "Have you seen that bench?" she asked, pointing at Jake's house. "It's breaking the rules. We can't let him get away with it." Some people nodded just to make her go away. Others, like Mrs. Lopez, shut the door in her face. "She's too loud," Mrs. Lopez told her dog later. "That bench isn't hurting anyone." But Karen didn't care what they thought. She was on a mission. One afternoon, Jake saw her standing by his mailbox. She wasn't getting her own mail. She was staring at his house, her phone in her hand. She typed something, then looked up at him and typed more. Jake waved, like always. "What's up, Karen?" he called. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, her flip-flops smacking extra hard. Jake scratched his head. "Weird," he said to himself. He didn't know she was sending emails to the HOA, telling them he was a problem resident. He didn't know she was calling him disrespectful and rude. The neighborhood was buzzing now. Kids on bikes slowed down to look at Jake's bench, wondering why Karen hated it so much. Grown-ups whispered over fences. "She's gone too far," Mr. Thompson said one day, shaking his cane. "It's just a bench," Jake nodded. "Yeah, but she doesn't think so." He still laughed about it, but that little question in his mind was growing. How far would she go? Karen wasn't done, not even close. She had more tricks up her sleeve, more plans in her head. She wasn't going to let Jake win. To her, this was a fight, and she was ready to do whatever it took. Jake didn't know it yet, but the tension was building. The air in Pinewood Hills wasn't so quiet anymore. Something big was coming, and it all started with that one little word: relax. Days went by in Pinewood Hills, and things started getting wilder. Karen Baxter wasn't calming down, she was getting bolder. She didn't just peek at Jake Miller from her window anymore. Nope, she turned into a real detective, like the ones you see in movies. She'd grab her phone and sneak outside, hiding behind her bushes. Then she'd snap pictures of Jake sitting on his red bench. Click, click, click. Her camera made little noises as she zoomed in. Evidence, she'd mutter to herself, her voice low and sneaky. I've got evidence now. She thought those pictures would prove Jake was bad, that his bench was some kind of big crime. Jake didn't know what she was up to at first. He'd sit on his bench every evening, sipping his lemonade, watching the sun go down. The sky would turn orange and pink, and he'd smile because it was so pretty. But one night something happened. Karen stepped out of her house, her flip-flops smacking loud as ever. She stood on her lawn, hands on her hips, and yelled across the street. "You'll regret this, Miller," she shouted, her voice sharp like a teacher scolding a kid. Jake looked up, surprised. "Regret what?" Sitting, he didn't yell back, he just waved, like always, with a big grin. "Okay, Karen," he called, nice and friendly. She huffed and stomped back inside, slamming her door so hard the windows shook. Jake laughed a little. "She's so dramatic," he said to himself, taking another sip of his drink. But then he noticed something weird. A police car rolled down the street super slow, like it was looking for something. Its tires crunched on the pavement and its lights were off, but Jake could see it clear as day. It passed his house, then stopped a few doors down, parking by Mr. Thompson's place. Jake tilted his head. "Huh," he said, "that's odd." He didn't think much of it, though. Maybe the cops were just driving around. He shrugged and went back to watching the sky. Weird, right? But no big deal, at least not yet. The next day, Karen took things up a notch. She wasn't playing around anymore, she was serious. Jake was outside, sweeping his porch, when Karen marched onto her lawn. She had her phone in her hand and she held it up to her ear. Right there in front of Jake, she called 911. Her voice was loud and fast. "Yes, officer," she said, almost shouting. "There's an illegal structure on my neighbor's porch. It's a safety hazard." A safety hazard means something dangerous, and to Karen, that bench was the most dangerous thing in the world. She waved her free hand around, pointing at Jake's house like it was on fire. "You need to come quick," she added. Jake stopped sweeping. He couldn't believe it. 911 for a bench. He put his broom down and stepped to the edge of his porch, arms crossed. He watched her, his mouth open a little. Karen kept talking, her words spilling out like water from a hose. "It's red, it's ugly, and it's breaking all the rules," she said. Jake could hear the dispatcher's voice crackling through the phone. It was a lady, and she sounded tired. "Ma'am," the lady said, "we'll send someone to check it out." Karen's face lit up. She smirked like she'd just won a prize at the fair. She hung up and looked at Jake, her eyes all smug. "You're in trouble now," she said, not loud but loud enough for him to hear. Jake shook his head. "A safety hazard," he said to himself. "It's a bench." He almost laughed, but he didn't. He just stood there watching Karen march back to her house, her flip-flops smacking away. She thought she'd won the lottery or something. She thought the police would come racing in, sirens blaring, to rip that bench right off his porch. Jake scratched his head and went back to sweeping. "She's crazy," he muttered, but deep down, that little question in his mind was growing bigger. Why's she doing this? What's next? Here's the thing though, Karen didn't see everything. She was so busy yelling and smirking that she missed something important. There was another police car already on the street. It was parked way down at the end, near the big oak tree by Mrs. Lopez's house. It had been there for a while, quiet and still. Jake saw it though. He'd noticed it when he was sweeping. It wasn't moving, just sitting there like it was waiting for something. Jake squinted at it, his broom still in his